The legendary island of Atlantis was said to be a rich naval empire that existed over 12,000 years ago. It's been described as a beautiful, Eden-like utopia with lush gardens, exotic fruit, and magnificent palaces made of gold and ivory stone. It was said to be populated by demigods led by Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea. That is, until the entire island suddenly vanished deep into the Atlantic Ocean, taking everyone and everything with it. While many believe this island paradise to be fictional, there are some die-hard researchers who beg to differ. Here's everything we know about the lost city of Atlantis, including remarkable findings from a modern research team. The intriguing legend of Atlantis started with Plato, an ancient Greek philosopher from the classical period. Plato wrote about Atlantis in 360 BC, saying that he had been told about it by his grandfather, who heard about it from an Athenian statesman, who heard about it from an Egyptian priest. According to Plato, Atlantis is believed to have existed somewhere near the Canary and Madeira Islands, outward from the Strait of Gibraltar, relatively close to the Mediterranean Sea. But while Plato's story is prominent, other possible locations include Helike, Thera, and even Troy, all of which are ancient cities believed to have been lost in time long ago. While it is often referred to as a city, some believe Atlantis was an entire island nation. According to Plato, Atlantis was larger than Libya and Asia combined, which in Plato's time would have referred to modern-day northern Africa and over half of Turkey. It is said to have been circular in shape, with ringed moats and a large canal running through the middle connecting with the sea. Atlantis was said to be a beautiful place, brimming with natural resources, lush gardens and corals, large mountains, exotic fruit, impressive architecture, and advanced technology. It's been described as a true paradise with a utopian civilization. But there's something about the people of Atlantis that leads many to believe this island haven may actually be more fiction than fact. As of today, there are no written records of Atlantis, and so everything we know has been passed down for generations. But according to Plato, we do know a little bit about the Atlanteans, the people who called Atlantis home. Plato believed the Atlanteans were divided into different social orders to do their tasks, much like the caste system in India. They had a fairly good life where all of their needs were fulfilled and people generally lived in harmony with nature and each other. Plato claimed they were a socialist economy where neither had any of them anything of their own, but they regarded all that they had as common property. But the seemingly utopian society isn't the only thing that is hard to believe. Many of the people in Atlantis were believed to be descendants of Greek gods, specifically Poseidon, the god of the sea. Poseidon put down roots in the lost city and had offspring with mortal women, essentially populating the archipelago with demigods. As some put it, the residents of Atlantis were half god and half human, which may be why they were so advanced during a time when the rest of the world was still in the Neolithic period. According to Plato, the gods of old divided up the lands so that each of them would have their own place. Poseidon was given a large plot of land inhabited by people who were said to be more beautiful and more intelligent than the rest of the world. But it wasn't until he fell in love that Atlantis was officially born. At some point, Poseidon fell in love with Plato, a mortal woman within the lands he was given. In order to protect her, he built a large palace carved from a mountain and surrounded it with circular moats, tall towers, and beautiful gardens. He called this palace Atlantis. Afterward, the mythical couple got right to work on starting a family, creating more demigods to help govern the land. Poseidon and Plato ended up having 5 sets of twin boys. The eldest, Atlas, was made the rightful king of the entire island and the ocean, called the Atlantic Ocean in his honor. Essentially, this family ruled all of Atlantis. Atlantis was rich in resources, especially metals, silver, gold, and most importantly, orichalcum, the most precious gold-red metal thought to be a copper alloy. So not only were the inhabitants of Atlantis powerful, they were wealthy too. Sadly, what do you get when you mix wealth and power? Greed. The Atlanteans may have had it all, but they wanted more. The earlier descriptions of the Atlanteans depicted the golden years, when they were still incorruptible. They were basically a perfect and virtuous society. However, as time went on, Atlas and his brothers had families of their own with mortal women. The divine portion began to fade, and the godly blood became weakened. This led Atlantis down a troubled path. According to Plato, when the godly blood became diluted too often and too much with the mortal admixture, and human nature got the upper hand, they then, being unable to bear their fortune, behaved unseemly. Basically, human nature outweighed divine nature, causing chaos to follow. The Atlanteans became more and more drawn to money and power, and found themselves wanting more. They wanted to take over all of the lands surrounding the Mediterranean Sea, and for the most part, they were successful until they targeted Athens. The Atlanteans waged war on Athens, and surprisingly, the noble underdogs claimed victory over the giant empire. Afterward, they went on to liberate all of the people and lands that the Atlanteans had captured during their power-hungry battles. This war did not go unnoticed, though. The gods were watching, and they were less than pleased. The Atlanteans suffered a moral decline right around the time the godly kings got together to discuss matters of the state, which happened every 5 or 6 years. At this meeting, Zeus, Poseidon's brother, had decided that the people of Atlantis had become pushy and greedy and needed to be punished. And although Atlantis was Poseidon's baby, he did not disagree. They had failed him and were deserving of what was to come. Poseidon, being the god of the sea, storms, earthquakes, and horses, was once nicknamed Earthshaker and was known to punish people using storms. These powerful sea storms would then wipe out ships, islands, and people as a result. By now you can imagine what he had in store for Atlantis. Although Atlantis was Poseidon's creation, which he made out of affection for his beloved Plato, he knew the situation with its people was getting out of hand. Shortly after the war with Athens, Poseidon made a difficult decision. After Athens had delivered Atlantis a devastating blow, Poseidon was next in line. The Atlanteans had fallen out of favor among the gods, and their time on Earth had expired. In a single day and night, Poseidon unleashed a series of catastrophic earthquakes causing massive flooding that ultimately swallowed up the entire city of Atlantis. The disaster caused so much damage to the land that it basically sank beneath the waves, bringing all of its people with it. The entire city of Atlantis sank to the bottom of the ocean in only one day. At this point, you may be skeptical whether there is any truth to this great story or not. And believe it or not, there may be. The story of the lost city of Atlantis is definitely a good one, with Greek gods, palaces made of gold, half human, half god rulers. There's enough magical details to keep most people interested. But the interesting thing about these ancient tales is that we often find ourselves wondering where the idea for them came from in the first place. What exactly inspired the tale of the lost city of Atlantis? Before we dive into the theories of modern-day explorers, which may actually change your mind about things, let's find out what other philosophers have had to say about Plato's seemingly made-up island paradise. Much like today, some ancient writers viewed Atlantis as a fictional or metaphorical myth, but many others believed it to be real, including many who studied alongside Plato themselves. Aristotle, who was a student of Plato, believed that Plato invented the island to teach philosophy, But then philosopher Crantor, a student of Plato's student Xenocrates, believed Plato's story to be real, and he has some pretty good reasons why. Crantor's work, a commentary on Timaeus, Plato's dialogue, is lost, but two other philosophers had reported on it. Crantor claimed he visited Egypt, had conversations with priests, and saw hieroglyphs confirming the story. He also claims that there are particulars written on pillars which are still preserved today, fueling current desperate explorations for finding the truth. There's one more historical theory that puts the focus on the Atlantean people when determining the existence of Atlantis. The 4th century historian Ammianus Marcellinus claimed that the Druids of Gaul said that some of the inhabitants of Gaul had migrated from distant islands, possibly Atlantis. It's further argued that it is unlikely that out of millions of inhabitants, all would have perished. More than likely, there were some survivors. Even with this Gaulish theory, most people believed Atlantis was nothing more than a myth. That is, until some people actually started looking underwater for it. Nowadays, most of us believe Atlantis is nothing more than a fun story, but others have taken a serious interest in the mystery and have done extensive research to prove its existence, and the evidence is compelling. There are many people who have set off in search of the lost city of Atlantis, doing deep dives for ancient artifacts on the seafloor, and each explorer has given us clues about the possible true location of Atlantis, with many recent discoveries leading to actual physical evidence. The idea that Atlantis was a real historical place and not just a legend invented by Plato surfaced in the late 19th century. Before that, it was generally regarded as folklore. But after people began diving and taking a more serious interest in its discovery, several other theories have now surfaced about the origins of Atlantis, the most widely known being writer Ignatius Donnelly's theory. In 1882, a writer named Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. Basically, he tried to prove that all known ancient civilizations were descended from Atlantis, which he saw as a more advanced ancient society. He drew parallels between creation stories of the Old and New Worlds, attributing connections to Atlantis, which he also believed had a biblical connection. Donnelly believed that the biblical Garden of Eden existed in Atlantis. He also believed that Atlantis was destroyed by the Great Flood, which is also mentioned in the Bible. He has now been credited as the father of the 19th century Atlantis revival, and is the reason the myth endures today, but he's still only one of many people who think they know the truth. Russian mystic and spiritualist Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophists, took up Donnelly's interpretations when she wrote The Secret Doctrine in 1888. She believed the Atlanteans were cultural heroes. In her book, Blavatsky believed the civilization of Atlantis reached its peak between 1,000,000 and 900,000 years ago, but destroyed itself through internal warfare that happened due to the dangerous use of psychic and supernatural powers of the inhabitants. So, similarly to Plato, she believed the people of Atlantis had supernatural powers that ultimately led to their own destruction. And one other Atlantis believer claims he has some actual proof. American psychic Edgar Cayce often spoke about Atlantis. During his life readings, he claimed that many of his subjects were reincarnations of people who had actually lived in Atlantis. By tapping into their collective consciousness, Cayce declared that he was able to give detailed descriptions of the lost continent. Cayce also declared that Atlantis would rise again in the 1960s, sparking much popularity for all things related to Atlantis in that decade, and that there is a Hall of Records beneath the Egyptian Sphinx, which holds the historical texts of the sunken empire. And while Atlantis did not rise again in the 1960s, a groundbreaking discovery was made instead. In the 1960s, we learned more about continental drift and plate tectonics, discovering that the Earth is composed of a number of large tectonic plates which have been slowly moving or drifting over the last several billion years. This discovery basically means it's impossible for there to be a lost continent. While present-day philosophers and classicists agree that the story was likely fictional, there is still debate on what served as its inspiration. It is commonly believed that Plato told the story as a warning to his fellow citizens against the desire for naval power. But a detailed and magical story like that has to have had some sort of inspiration. For those who believe the story to be mythical, there are some theories as to what that inspiration may have been, the Thera eruption being one of them. What was the Thera eruption? Dated back to the 16th century BC, a large tsunami is believed to have devastated a beautiful and powerful Greek island called Thera, further leading some to believe that this may have been the catastrophe that inspired Plato's story. This area is now called Santorini, and to this day it remains a hotspot for Atlantis explorers. Another hotspot is the Azores. Various island groups in the Atlantic Ocean have been identified as possible locations for Atlantis, notably the Azores, one of two autonomous regions of Portugal. Cores of sediment covering the ocean bottom surrounding the Azores prove that it has been an undersea plateau for millions of years, causing some to believe the unique setting is actually a sunken city. In 2011, a US-led research team found ancient structures deep underwater off the coast of Spain. The team believes that whether or not it was Atlantis specifically, they definitely found the ruins of an ancient sunken city, which only fuels the mystery of Atlantis even more. But they're not the only ones who found concrete evidence of a lost city. In 2024, another research team also made a remarkable discovery. In recent years, scientists may have discovered the evidence of a lost city off the coast of the Canary Islands. Researchers from Spain's Geological and Mining Institute have been studying a submerged mountain, which they believe could be the origin of the Atlantis legend. The large seamount, named Mount Los Atlantes, was once part of a system of islands that existed around 15 million years ago. Over time, the islands sank into the ocean, something that still continues to happen today. During the summer of 2024, the research team used remotely operated vehicles equipped with cameras and robotic arms to explore the area, and what they found was incredible. The seamount's location and characteristics very closely match Plato's descriptions. The presence of coral gardens, sponges, and areas covered with bacterial tapestries on the seamount itself support the idea that it was once a thriving island ecosystem. And that's not all. Much of the area along the seamount still maintains its ancient beaches, deep below the surface, aligning perfectly with descriptions of the lost city. If there is evidence of other sunken cities, why is the idea of Atlantis considered so far-fetched? There are dozens of possible discoveries of Atlantis, including explorations that are still set to take place in 2024 and 2025. Many of these teams are funded by large organizations who seem to truly believe in their studies, including a diverse team of researchers known as Subnautica, who are funded by the European Research Council. Subnautica is currently exploring a submerged landmass in the North Sea known as Doggerland. So far, they've made incredible discoveries and are gearing up for more. The mystery of the lost city of Atlantis will likely never die. After thousands of years, there are still teams of people who dedicate their life's research to looking for Atlantis, and they are making incredible discoveries. And who knows, they may be getting closer and closer to finding the lost city every day. What do you think? Was Atlantis real? And if so, will we ever find it? Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe to see more videos like this one.